let's load some promethium into some flame tanks and talk over some of the biggest threats with flamers in Warhammer 40K 10th edition. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking 40k 10th edition again. In this video I thought we'd take a look at the joys of torrent weapons, and a whole slew of units that do particularly well for their factions, and often bring some flamers into competitive lists. Generally they're all pretty savage at clearing out enemy infantry, and of course with torrent weapons auto-hitting it means that basically all of these are enormous overwatch threats, and might not be the best news to see on the other side of the table if you're trying to move up some light infantry to claim some objectives. First up, let's go through a bunch of strong units with flamethrowers, and then talk briefly about a whole load of honourable mentions that are also really quite good. First up, let's start with the Thousand Sons Rubric Marines. 5 Marines for 105 points, and pretty much the mainstay of the Thousand Sons battle line right now. Typically most lists are super heavy on the sorcerers, maybe somewhere between 15 and 30 Rubric Marines depending on how heavy you go, plus some mutalisks and chaff in support. These guys are just very effective battle line troops to be able to skirmish on objectives. They bring objective control 2 and a 5+ invulnerable save, plus chip in a fairly good way to Cabal points, more so than some things like Scarab Occult. And their main damage threat are the Warp Flamers, Mass D6, Strength 4, AP 1 and Damage 1 auto hits with Ignore Cover. That's already a profile that's going to be pretty nasty against any light infantry out there, particularly Toughness 3. But they do have a pretty scary amount of buffs that they can stack on these to make them even nastier. Usually if you've got a squad of 5 of them, there might be 3 Warp Flamers, one with a Warp Flame pistol and Warp Smite, and then maybe one having a Soul Reaper, or a 4th Warp Flamer if you want to maximise Overwatch. Just at base, you get to reroll wound rolls of 1 or all wound rolls against units on objectives, so that means that you're just going to stack an enormous amount of scary wounds against anything that's trying to hold a point in the midboard. And plus on top of that, any wound rolls of 6 get an extra pip of AP due to the Icon of Flame. That means a lot of things are going to be saving on far worse saves than you might expect, given AP -1 and they ignore cover. Besides that, they've got a ton of ways to get them there better or make them more dangerous when they get in range. You can potentially double move them with a Kabbalistic Ritual if it's going to be big, or use the big one to get an extra AP -2 shooting, which means that a lot of things in the game might be pushed onto their invulnerable saves. Araman can give them +1 to wound. The Umbrellific Crystal can be used to teleport them across the board, or you could use a Rhino to deliver them into battle and get the Warp Flamers to work. If you want just sheer flamethrower damage though, then adding in an Infernal Master to the unit can be extra nasty. Another 2d6 Strength 6, AP 2 and Damage 1 torrent attacks, and that'll get the Rubric Marines built-in buffs, so you'll be re-rolling wound rolls of 1 all the time, or all wound rolls on objectives, and that's a flamethrower that's going to strip off a bunch of wounds even against tough stuff, and he even gets that Icon of Flame debuff as well. He can also change 1 wound to an automatic 6 as well, so that should be 1 bit of damage a little bit more than you might expect, never mind any things from the detachment buffs like getting devastating wounds. Finally, Rubric Marines can be weirdly enough good for Chaos Space Marines as allies in Renegade Raiders. Due to the keywords, they do get the Assault and the extra AP against objectives, both of which are kind of massive for a fairly solid datasheet anyway. Being able to advance to get those Warp Flamers in range within 12 inches is kind of big. They've got some nice stratagems with transports as well, and getting the Flamers to AP -2 re-rolling all wounds is going to purge just about whatever the enemy put there. Overall, as a battle line troop that makes flamers work, Rubric Marines are pretty top tier. Next up, we've got the Trusty Guard Flame Tank in the Hellhound. 115 points for this. It's kind of interesting that the Guard have 2 really quite good flame tanks to choose from. You can either go for the actual Hellhound, or get a Chimera with a whole bunch of Kaschan jungle fighters inside it, and that one still has 4 torrent attacks. I must admit I think I'd maybe underestimated the Hellhound a bit. It was interesting to see Morty and Gloria's take on the tank in the recent Ranking Every Guard Unit video that we did. I'll leave that linked in the video description. But basically I think it underestimated the value of stripping cover to the Imperial Guard, and after the points cut that it had, I feel like these things are looking a lot better than they were, even if I still think that the Kaschan Chimera with a bunch of flamers does have a load of positives as well. In any case, the Hellhound gets you 2d6, Strength 6, AP 2 and Damage 1 Flamer attacks with Ignore Cover. Maybe not crazy damage for 115 points, but it's going to take a chunk out of most infantry, and then backed up with a Hunter Killer Missile and either a Heavy Bolter or a Heavy Flamer. The Heavy Flamer maybe being the obvious choice for maximal Overwatch and doubling down on its main purpose. The Heavy Bolter really might not be the worst choice in the world though, to be able to hand out the Ignores Cover debuff at longer range. I would say that the main reason to bring the Hellhound is to strip cover from the target, and it can just work with a whole load of other guard synergy things to get low AP things up to potentially terrifying AP. Between a Hellhound, a Leman Russ Exterminator and the Fields of Fire stratagem, you could essentially boost guns to effectively 3 better AP than they'd normally be if you were targeting something in cover, and that's going to be kind of massive for anything with fairly low AP, particularly things like battle cannons with AP -1, or maybe a bunch of the mid AP type things that say the Rogue or Dawn has. Kind of mad that if you had a battle cannon shooting against something in cover, you can kind of effectively boost its AP1 to an effective AP -4. Beyond that, for its points cost, is at least fairly sturdy for the cost, 11 wounds at toughness 10 with a 2+ save. It's going to need a bit of focused high AP things to take down, and can be a scary source of overwatch, as can most of these units. The alternative for the guard though would be to fill a Chimera with a bunch of Kazachan jungle fighters for 125 points. The base Chimera is 70 points and excellent value. It can mount 2 heavy flamers for 2d6 strength 5 AP1 damage 1 attacks, and then get somewhere between 6 and 12 las guns and 3 and 6 stubber shots, potentially 18 shots worth of small arms to go with those heavy flamers within 12 inches, and then also triple down on the volume fire with the 2 Kazachan flamers firing out the top hatch, adding another 2d6 strength 4 ignores that cover auto hits into the mix. The only downside is that you can't use those when overwatching. Overall, that really is quite a lot of great volume fire to be able to clear out enemy hordes trying to take the mid board. The Chimera itself can scout up the board to try and get an effective threat range to clear stuff out, and then whenever it makes sense to, it can deposit 20 objective control worth of Kazachan jungle fighters onto a mid-board point to score the objective or force the opponent to deal with them, or you could just have them get out when the tank itself is destroyed, maybe behind terrain to give the opponent annoying target priority issues. Overall, kind of interesting that they're both fairly threatening little flame tanks to lighter infantry, and you can either have some whole army synergy with ignores cover, or the disembarking infantry with objective control shenanigans. Next up, let's talk some jump infantry with the new and more scary Sisters of Battle Seraphim. These were certainly pretty great pre-codex with their hand flamers and their move shoot move, but Bringers of Flame took them to the next level. They're 85 points per 5 and can still work fine for a slightly premium nuisance unit with their move shoot move, but in Bringers of Flame I've seen several people take 10 of them for 170 points. That spit out a crazy amount of damage. In that kind of squad, at base you get 8 hand flamers plus 12 bolt pistol shots, so 8d6 strength 4 auto hits with ignores cover, and they're strength 4 because they're Ministorum hand flamers, so are raised from the standard ones. They can move quickly and deep strike, which is nice for getting them into their targets, and their move shoot move ability could allow them to reach unusual areas on the map, or just move really fast with 18 inches, or potentially have them hit the enemy and then recoil behind cover so they don't get hit back too hard on the counter strike. Then in the Bringers of Flame detachment, they get so much more. The assault keyword means they could move an automatic 18 inches if you can spare a big miracle dice if you want to, or just roll for it, or plug in a mid value if you need reliability, and then still move the further 6 inches after shooting. It could be moving 24 inches reliably with the unit. The hand flamers get boosted up to strength 5 within 12 inches, which they'll have to be to fire anyway, so wounding things like Space Marines on a 3+, and they can still wound things that are toughness 8 and 9 on a 5. Then to turn up the heat and make that AP 0 into much more, there's a 1 command point stratagem for devastating wounds, so out of a base unit of 10 of them, that's be 4 or 5 devastating wounds in one shooting phase for a squad. Massive extra damage against things that had good saves. That means they can take a big chunk out of monsters and vehicles as well. And then finally, you can take a jump cannoness in the unit with an extra hand flamer, and also an extra +1 hits per torrent weapons. So overall, with average rolling, that'll be about 41 attacks that hit out of the squad, and around 7 devastating wounds. Never mind anything else that all of that quite literal volume fire gets out of them. Even if you don't have the dev wound stratagem, they could still get a castigator to hand out AP -1 against their targets. Again, that's rather great to get a bunch of strength 5 hand flamers on the go, essentially a unit with pretty much 9 heavy flamers at that point. Overall, fairly scary, and not too surprising people have been taking a few of them. They're definitely a unit that needs to pick and choose their targets and what they do though. They are going to be very fragile when they get hit back. Only toughness 3 and 1 wound isn't great for 17 points each. Next up, for another great big flame tank, we've got the Land Raider Redeemer. 285 points has put it up a bit, but it still seems to be at least a fairly common pick for competitive lists, delivering marine melee into the fight and providing enormous overwatch threat in the midboard. The Redeemer's Flamestorm cannons are just incredibly scary. 2d6 plus 6 auto hits on the enemy, all with strength 6, AP 2, damage 2 and ignores cover. And between that lot, it makes itself one of the single scariest Overwatch units in the entire game, with an average of 13 hits on the enemy. Just for 1 command point, that's going to kill around about 6 Space Marines with average rolling, do nastier things to hordes with lighter saves, and even take a few wounds off lighter monsters and vehicles as well. That's not counting its assault cannons, multi-melter, storm bolter and hunter killer missile as well. Land Raiders are generally quite tough, 16 wounds at toughness 12 with a 2+ save, fairly solid at base, better in cover, and even better with armour of contempt. And the Land Raider Redeemer can deliver melee units where they're needed. Basically, any on-foot melee combo from Space Marines can use these pretty credibly. Roll up the board 10 inches, get out 3 inches, and then be ready to charge. They are definitely a fair bit more expensive now at 285 points, but can still be a massive problem unit for the opponent. Lots of armors are just going to struggle to have enough anti-tank damage to take down one of these, particularly if the anti-tank damage is sort of middling to low AP. With cover and armor of contempt, you could still be saving on a 2+ against AP2 things, which is pretty intimidating and basically not going to be too worth shooting. It could potentially get even scarier in Firestorm or with Vulcan Hestan around as well. Vulcan could give you full reroll wound rolls against its target, which is pretty massive, and the Firestorm could give you strength 7 flamers, just in case you were trying to toast something that was toughness 6 or 7. For the demons, I think it's worth mentioning the Flamers of Tzeentch, 75 points per 3 of these, and you can take up to 6, 3 wound jump infantry that can deep strike with toughness 4 and a 4+ invulnerable save, so take at least a little bit of focus fire from various things to take down. Chaos Demons have access to a whole bunch of interesting deep strike things. One of the more fun ones is the 3-inch deep strike stratagem to allow you to jump a unit into the enemy's backfield. On paper, these guys feel like one of the best choices to do that with, given that they've actually got some damage outputs that they can do when they get there, potentially turning up to score something like behind enemy lines and remove a whole bunch of enemy units in the process perhaps. If you're feeling spendy with command points as well, then a big block of 6 of them could be interesting for all sorts of other things. You could do crazy combos like rapid ingressing a unit of flamers and then using 1 command point to overwatch a unit that's about to charge. That'd be quite a big combo, but if it's the difference between just burning down a massive enemy melee unit that was about to charge something important and not doing so, then it could be worth the 2 CP spend. For their actual damage output, they get D6 Strength 4, AP 1 and Damage 1 flame attacks. Maybe not the most crazily scary profile ever, but with 6 of them it's still going to stack a bunch of saves on things. They're one of the units that can get loads of value out of that Draft of Terror stratagem though. 1 command points to boost the AP to -2 will be big against Space Marine equivalents, and also if you can hit something that had Battle Shock you get to reroll the wound roll as well. It could even be nice to pair that with a Skull Cannon potentially for that. AP -2 flamers with loads of auto hits that reroll wound rolls just seems like a recipe to burn down most things. Beyond that, they do have some other synergy. You could use an Exalted Flamer for the assault keyword and a little bit more general purpose damage from them if you wanted, and the Lord of Change could boost them to strength 5 if it's convenient too. I feel like he's got to focus on the main things that he's doing though, and deliberately running next to flamers might not necessarily be the best idea. Finally, for main unit focuses, I thought I'd mention the Pteraxii Sterilyzors. They were one of the units that were seeing quite a lot of competitive play before the big AdMech update, and they still seem to be appearing in competitive lists now plenty. 2 wound jump infantry with a 4+ save and a 5+ invulnerable. Phosphor torches that hit like basic flamers with strength 4, AP 0, damage 1, rerolling wound rolls on objectives, or getting 4 wound rerolls if they're next to a battle line unit, which might not often be the hardest thing to do given that AdMech tend to have quite a lot of them running around. With the Doctriners, you can now get a very easy AP -1 for being near those same battle line units, so it kind of doubles down on making it important to deep strike next to Skitarii Vanguard or Rangers perhaps. Plus the assault keyword could be nice enough with the Conqueror Doctriner to be able to hit something far away. Then with a big unit of 10 of them, they're one of the better units to do focal stratagems in the Skitarii Hunter cohort for. They get stealth, so get to be a little bit more durable in that one, and then have all sorts of good damage and defensive buffs on offer. Possibly one of the best ones is returning to Strategic Reserve for a couple of units if they manage to be unengaged and want to be able to redeploy to do secondaries or hit something else, then they can. And beyond that, they've just got loads of other options. Reactive 5+ Feel No Pain, I Can't Shoot Me Outside of 18 inches stratagem, extra AP if multiple units focus on one target, and a +1 to wound against an isolated unit if they're greater than 6 inches from other enemies. Between all that and a 150 point unit of Sterilizers, seems like they could be very reasonable targets for most of those, obviously competing against the other things on offer though. Finally, just to wrap up with a whole bunch of honourable mentions, all the rest of these still being very viable flamethrower armed units that can go in competitive lists regularly. Tau Star Scythe suits can get 3 suits with twin flamers, getting AP -1 against non-monsters and vehicles, and they're great in retaliation cadre, strength 5 and a further AP -1 if they can get in close. Both Commander Farsight and the Cold Star Commander can be good for them in their own ways. The +1 to wound from Farsight's quite nice, though he might want to be using that on one of the other suit variants. For the Space Marines, Flamestorm aggressors in Firestorm are pretty savage. Strength 5 Flamestormers with extra AP against the closest targets. Then stratagems either for 1 command point for +1 to wound, or 2 CP for the devastating wound torrent stratagem. Often being accompanied by a captain for the purposes of making those cheaper. Can be pretty scary to have a repulsor or a Land Raider Redeemer with them in to be able to threaten to jump out and shoot the enemy in their own turn as well. Another option for that detachment could be Infernus Marines with Vulcan Hestan. Lots of Torrent Flamers can be another one for the devastating wound torrents, and Vulcan can allow you to reroll for wound rerolls, which the aggressors already have. The Death Guard I think have some scary torrents worth mentioning. The Foul Blight Spawn and the Malignant Plague Caster both can be pretty good damage output for their cost. The Foul Blight Spawn coming with Fights First as well, so it's just a nasty character to have attached to Plague Marines, maybe in tandem with a Biologist Putrefier. The Plague Casters can be nice damage output in their own right, maybe debuffing a unit against the right foe as well. Maybe not technically Flamers for the purposes of this video, but given their torrent weapons that are nasty enough I thought to include them. The Bile Predator has some fairly fearsome Flamestorm Overwatch, backed up by Sponson Flamers, seems fairly reasonably costed, park it next to a midfield objective and threaten to burn down things that move onto it. Grey Knights quite enjoy their incinerators, even if I feel like beyond if you're going for some sort of maxed out purgation squad type thing. Most of the Grey Knight units don't really have the incinerator as their primary purpose, it's just more sort of added on as the special weapon choice, or the Dread Knight getting a big heavy 2d6 incinerator. Lots of spam strength 6, AP 1, damage 1 purging is generally nice to have for a fairly elite army. Sisters of Silence Witch Seekers for the Adeptus Custodes are a solid choice for scoring points and things. I feel like maybe the Flamers almost a little bit extra and just nice to have that little bit of close range damage output, more so than their primary purpose being a damage dealer unit, though they can be kind of scary with certain stratagems in some of the detachments, gaining a bit of AP or other buffs. For the Tyranids, probably worth mentioning the Pyrovore as a 35-point cheap little flame turret with 5 wounds at toughness 6. They're good for secondaries and screening and things, and having a bit of anti-infantry threat doesn't hurt at all. Maybe the Tyran effects with Acid Spray is worth a mention, though again not really a flamer, just a torrent. And finally returning to the Sisters, there's plenty more from the Sisters of Battle Codex. Dominions, Immolators, and Dominions in Immolators are all very scary. Bringers of Flame Dominions can have Strength 6 Ministorum Flamers and can combine with things like Castigators for a bit more threat against their target. Again, could use the Devastating Wound 1 if they wanted to. And Immolators often tend to take Multi-Melters, though some people do like the Immolation Flamers if you want a little bit more balance towards more anti-infantry and big Overwatch versus anti-tank. In any case, I'll leave that there for this one. Let me know your favourite fire-breathing Warhammer 40k units out there. There are plenty of others that I haven't mentioned in the video, but feel free to let me know if I missed anything that you consider super strong. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.